All right, bang. Today is Friday. It is February 25th. Welcome to the Dog Walk presented by Barstool Sports. True Crime Friday. You guys know the drill here by now. Before I really hop into it, though, I do want to talk about some great sponsors of the show. The first one being Fuzzy. Yourfuzzy.com/dog. Okay, you guys should know this by now. If you have a pet, whether it be a cat, an iguana, whatever it is, go check out yourfuzzy.com/dog because it is a telehealth service for pet parents that offers 24/7 access to personalized pet care from veterinarian professionals. From everyday questions to middle of the night emergencies, Fuzzy has the answers pet parents need. Through live chat and virtual vet consultations available to you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, Fuzzy can answer your pet questions big and small, urgent, and every day. Fuzzy can also recommend the exact right products for your pet, all of which are handpicked by their established team of veterinarian professionals and available at discounts exclusive to Fuzzy members. From getting your pet's diet just right to meeting their middle of the night needs to finally figuring out what makes their breath smell that way, nothing is too big or small for a quick Fuzzy call. So right now, Fuzzy is offering our listeners a free 7-day trial membership. That's free 99 7 days. Check it out. You got nothing to lose. All you got to do is go to yourfuzzy.com/dog today to sign up. That's a free 7-day trial at yourfuzzy.com/dog. And for a limited time, Fuzzy is also offering a special discount of $20 off of any of your pet's product needs. That's pet meds, supplements, food, and more with promo code DOG. Once again, that's yourfuzzy.com/dog for your free trial of Fuzzy with access to 24/7 personalized pet care and vet-recommended products. Go check out Fuzzy. Make sure your pet is in a good situation, that you're just really being there for them because it's the best way to go. Besides Fuzzy, you know we got to talk about Roman. It's Friday night, people. You're probably getting out there. You're getting after it. You're thinking about getting after it. Don't be one of those chumps that's left at the gate, two pumping, and you're not going to be able to do anything for because you don't have the Roman swipes. The Roman swipes are a necessity. It's a necessity, in my opinion, if you want to be making sure you're bringing the A game out when you're pumping the lady friend or pumping, the girl at the bar, whatever it is. The Roman swipes are there for you because it's an obviously a clinically proven way to last longer in bed. We say that all the time. That's the key word, clinically proven. They're effective, they're easy to use, and they're fast acting, but they don't require a prescription. Roman can ship swipes to you in discreet, unmarked packaging, and each swipe packet is small enough to hide in your wallet for whenever you need it. They're super easy to use. Just take the swipe out of the packet, swipe it on, let it dry, you're good to go. That's it. If you get your hands on them, go to getroman.com/dogwalk, and you can get your first month of swipes for just $5 when you choose a monthly plan. That's getroman.com/dogwalk. Go do it. Make sure you're ready to go. Stop using the old methods. Stop, thinking, what Dante said the other day, I'm thinking of this. Don't do that. That's gross. That's gross. Don't do it. Getroman.com/dogwalk. Go get the swipes. All right, Allie, how are you today?
Doing good. Did you see the gift that I left you on your desk?
No, I didn't. Is this your name?
It's my autograph.
Your autograph?
My name.
I mean,
you can keep that. You can sell that on the internet.
It's not bad handwriting, but it's very generic.
I thought it was great handwriting.
It's just generic.
Is yours better?
No, certainly not.
Great.
But yours is definitely better. Did you break this?
No, I did not.
I don't know. I think you did.
Certainly did not.
But anyways, good to have you back. Thanks for the auto. What's the word for today?
All right. Today we are covering Christian Longo, which is a story that I have heard a lot before. It's a pretty well-known one, so you might know it once we get into it. It actually reminds me of the Lacey Peterson and Scott Peterson case. Very similar, in my opinion, very similar as far as family annihilators go. Christian Longo was raised in Ypsilanti Township, Michigan, which is actually not far. Harry, you're an Ann Arbor guy. It's not far from where I grew up. It's near Ann Arbor, Michigan, for U of M fans. He was actually raised by parents who were very strict Jehovah's Witness. So he was very into his religion. He, for the most part, I did see conflicting statements on this, but what I gathered more so of is that he did have a happy childhood. I did see one source that said he was abused by his father, but I could not corroborate that with another source. So for the most part, had a happy childhood. He was actively involved in his church growing up, like really involved. At the age of 19 years old, he met Mary Jane Baker, who was 26 at the time, and they got married. They met actually at church. The two got married, so married pretty young. I mean, he was only 19 years old. She was 26, but for a 19-year-old to be married, that's pretty, that's a young age, right? I mean, I was nowhere near ready to be married at 19 years old, that's for sure.
19 is young.
I will say, also as a disclaimer on this case, the Christian Longo case, we could probably make like 4 or 5 episodes out of. It's a very detailed case. There are some conflicting pieces of information. So what I'm feeding you there is, there's sources out there that say other things, but I did my best to stay on some reliable sources with this. We are going to go into detail, but not into the little nitty gritties of things because again, we could talk about this case for hours.
A lot going on.
Yeah. So after the two were married, Christian and Mary Jane, right off the bat, Longo began having financial issues. So he purchased a 3.5 carat engagement ring for Mary Jane, which I don't know how familiar you are with diamonds. That's a big diamond.
It's a rock.
That's a rock. It came to the point where he began actually stealing money from his work because he didn't have enough to cover both rent and this ring payment. So once he began stealing, he stole money from his work, and his employer, they started questioning the employees about the missing money. They noticed right away. Longo did not confess to being the one who did it. Did not indicate by any means, but overnight after that very next day, the guilt was weighing on him so heavily that he went to work, left a check for the amount of money that he took, and handed the check in with his resignation letter, left that job. So little mishap there. It actually, because of this, he was not able to make rent that month. His church did find out about it, and they did reprimand him as well for these, kind of unfit actions, if you will. He began to feel these financial burdens of not having enough money, and kind of getting himself in too deep. And it really started to stress on him, but he was somebody who was super adamant on the fact that he would portray that, his life was perfect, happy, rainbows and unicorns, and to, outwardly to everybody else, and didn't want anybody to know that he was actually going through some struggles, including his wife. So he hid a lot of this from Mary Jane as well. So she didn't even know that they were having financial troubles until it got pretty bad. Now, Longo stated, and I quote, when he got in trouble for stealing money from his employer and he got reprimanded by the church, he stated, "I determined that I would never do anything along those lines again, anything that was not only illegal, but immoral or unsavory," which turned out to be extremely ironic.
Yeah.
So Longo, after this whole employer incident, he continued to max out family credit cards. He now had no money coming in, but again, was still portraying that everything was like fine and dandy on the outside. Longo actually conned tens of thousands of dollars out of his father, who his father thought that he was investing in Longo's, new business. Longo was actually basically just going on like massive shopping sprees. He was buying boats and jet skis and new cars and the whole 9 yards. This began to eventually catch up with Longo when his truck got repossessed. At that time, their other car was actually broken down. So he was now stuck without a vehicle. One, panicked that people would start to catch on to this. 2, he didn't have a ride anywhere. So his solution to this was to create a fake driver's license, go to test drive a car, and then just never returned with it. Not the most sufficient plan ever, but again, he was so caught up in the fact that he had to have these nice things that he was willing to do anything to get them. Now, He also began faking bills and statements and basically faking their financials to his wife. His wife started to catch on that just things were not adding up. She's like, why aren't we getting bills for these things? Things are not adding up here. And he was like, oh, okay. Started faking them so she could think that these were their financials. Everything was set and steady. All was well. Now, financial strain was not the only factor that was weighing on their marriage, though. Mary Jane had actually found emails from Christian to another woman, and when she confronted him about these emails, Longo basically stated, he told her, since we have kids, you are no longer fun anymore, and I don't love you. Like, very blunt.
Probably didn't go over well.
Yeah, no. But Mary Jane did stay with him. So whatever conspired there, she decided to stay with him. Longo, again, still had no sense of income, but needed to keep up this appearance, per se. So he began faking checks from companies that would owe this business he was creating, would owe his business money. He faked a check and he cashed them. This, again, only sent his financial problems into a whirlwind. These companies started catching on. He was busted for this in September of 2000, and police busted him. He actually got 3 years probation. He was ordered to pay restitution, which was way more than he could afford because he just really couldn't afford much of anything at this point. All of his money that was coming in was fraudulent. He was conning his family members, faking bills, stealing things, the whole 9 yards. But he did get busted for this. And this was kind of the beginning of his downfall, very beginning of his downfall. So with these walls starting to close in on Longo financially, now he's got problems with the law, people began to start noticing like, hey, maybe the Longo family isn't actually as picture perfect as we thought. And again, this really stressed, this really weighed on Longo. He really needed to have this portrayal of being kind of that perfect family. Due to this, Longo decided, all right, we need to up and move. We need to start over. We need to kind of repaint our picture and our reputation. So he moved the family from Michigan to a warehouse in Toledo, Ohio. A warehouse, no plumbing, no kitchen, no nothing. Told Mary Jane that I'm going to renovate this place. I'm going to make it into our home. I'm going to make it, workable for us to live in, yada, yada, yada. He did not do that, first of all. Second of all, moving out of the state actually broke his probation. So not a good idea. In Ohio, Longo continued to run his money schemes while also lying to Mary Jane that, everything was fine, everything was going to work out, like it's okay. He, at one point, he got a job at a Starbucks, but he was so embarrassed about it that he told his coworkers, like, oh, I'm just doing this as a side gig because I really like Starbucks coffee, but I actually have like a full-time day job. Just like was that caught up in appearances.
Damn.
Yeah. So he continued to run his money schemes though, like, all his fraudulent income and whatnot. And I don't know. Clearly he was not thinking long-term, that the fact that like these things do catch up to you. And it doesn't take long to do that. So with kind of, keeping in his pattern of like, hey, I am running all these schemes and cons and getting all this money illegally. So we need to make sure that we're continuously on the move to where it's going to take people too long to catch up to us and we'll already be gone. So he decided that it was best to keep his family moving, and they made their way all the way over to Oregon. That's quite the journey.
Yeah. Ann Arbor to Toledo is not that drastic.
No, not really. So being that they made their way all the way to Oregon, this is far away. I'm sure part of that thought process was like, we are so far away that we left all our troubles behind, right? We're quote unquote starting fresh. Longo here was still not able to really lock down a place for them to live. He ended up getting an apartment by faking that he was waiting on a paycheck and not having to put a deposit down. Of course, then that deposit never came. He wasn't able to make rent. For a while, they moved into like a hotel room, and then they ended up moving into a different complex, was just moving all around, could not secure anything. Throughout all of this, and, we can't really, again, we can't corroborate this today through Mary Jane, but Mary Jane did say, like, I didn't know about any of this. I was in the dark about all our financials and stuff, but to some point I kind of asked myself, like, when do you start to catch on? Because these are all very significant actions that Longo is taking for their family, moving them multiple times across the country, not being able to secure housing. Longo, having the only job he really has is working at Starbucks and, yada, yada, yada. I think there was definitely something she was in the dark about, but I wonder how much she
the red flag she ignored.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, just moving to a warehouse is.
Yeah. That should have been your first sign of, like,
crazy.
Hey, something is seriously amiss.
Yeah.
But regardless, it just really was, Oregon didn't make anything better. It was the same thing in a different location. But doing all these things, all of this was really starting to pile up on Longo and was this heavy, heavy burden on his shoulders. It took to the point where he was so deep that he could not handle the stress of it all anymore. And he couldn't even, he was having trouble keeping up with his own web of lies. There was just way too many crosshairs. Things were catching up with him. And he was kind of like hitting this dead end where he felt like he was trapped in, per se. This caused Longo to absolutely snap. He brutally, brutally murdered his wife and his 3 children. Now, getting into, we can go like nitty gritty into conspiracies about this one. December 19th, 2001, police got a call from a man who, lived in an RV near a body of water. And he called police because he actually came across a body of this small boy floating face down in the water. This was near his home, so he had come across this unexpectedly, that's a very frightening thing to come across. Just unexpectedly, you're near your home, and all of a sudden you see a body floating, and it's a small boy. Police immediately, they released a digitally enhanced photo of what this boy looked like to try and identify him, see who he is, if anybody knows him, then you could give him like any insight into how this body got here. This couple that had babysat the kids in the past called into police, and they were like, hey, you know what? This looks a lot like 4-year-old Zachary Longo. In the following days, once they identified that this was Zach Longo, again, he was only 4 years old, the police began a search of the waters where Zach was discovered to see if there was anything else in there, if they could find any clues, give them any leads, see where they could go with this. Little did they know what they were actually about to start uncovering. Now, police began searching these waters, and they came across the body of a small girl. And this one was actually not immediately visible. So when they started to search the water with divers, they found this body with a pillowcase tied around her ankles, and the pillowcase had a rock in it. So essentially, it was clear signs of somebody trying to sink the body, yep, get rid of the body, hide the evidence, destroy the evidence with water. We know water, things like water, fire, those outside factors really mess with a lot of evidence that you can collect. So they recovered this body, and this was the body of Sadie Longo. So now we've got 2 Longo children who are dead from the same body of water. Now, both kids were also discovered to only be in their underwear as well. So immediately this sets off a whole another spiral of questions that the police have, or potential motives, what have you. December 27th, the divers then headed into search the local waterways for anyone or anything else that they could find, right? Because at this point, you're coming in as a police, you've got 2 dead bodies that were found in this water in 2 very different ways. And that's really all they have to go off of, right? They don't know who, they don't know how, they don't know any of that stuff. But they're searching the waterways to try and find what they can find. As we know, water carries. So that's where they came in. They're like, we're going to search these other local waterways because what if something got carried away and there's something that we're missing? Now, they discovered 2 suitcases that were underneath a dock that was adjacent to the complex that the Longos had been living in, which was their last known home. In one of the suitcases, they opened it up. There was the body of 2-year-old Madison Longo. Also in the suitcase was other miscellaneous clothing and a dumbbell. Clearly signs of, again, trying to sink this, dispose of a body, trying to conceal the body by putting it in a suitcase. Now, in the other suitcase, there was strings of hair coming out of it. So police kind of knew what they were getting into with this one before they even opened it. They opened up the suitcase and they found the naked body of Mary Jane Longo. So now you got all 3 Longo kids and Mary Jane. Immediately, the first person they want to bring in for questioning is Christian Longo. The Emmy conducted the autopsies.
Or I'm sure they might not have known if they were going to find him too.
Yes. So you're right. I should correct myself there. They wanted to, their first motive was to find Christian Longo. If he was alive, bring him in for questioning. They were not able to find him. They were not able to locate him or bring him in because he had actually fled to Mexico. And this was, so on December 27th is when Mary Jane and Madison were found in their respective suitcases under the bridge. By December 28th, Longo was already in Mexico. So it wasted no time, clear signs of, preconceived notions of planning and that kind of thing. Now, the medical examiner did conduct autopsies of all 4 of the bodies, and they determined that the cause of death was asphyxia. And in Zach and Sadie's cases, it was debated on whether or not their cause of death was actually drowning. Again, those were the first 2 bodies found, and they were both found in or beneath the water. There was also very, very clear signs of blunt force trauma to Mary Jane's face. So, if you're looking in, again, if you're the police, you're looking in at this case, you're seeing a lot of different factors here, right? You've got one body that was floating, one body that was sunken, 2 bodies that were in suitcases, one with blunt force trauma, very scattered. But the one kind of denominator here was Christian Longo. He was obviously related, very closely related to all 4 of these individuals, and he was also nowhere to be found. Now, like I said, by that next day, December 28th, Christian Longo was, had already fled to Mexico. This was just, now we're talking crossing international borders, right? And think about it. They're in Oregon, so he has to make his way down to Mexico. It's not like he just hopped over the California border, right? He had to make his way down there. This was very clear signs to police that there was something about Christian that was involved in these murders. So December 28th, that very next day, he was charged with the murders of all 4 of his families. Obviously, there was now an arrest warrant, and he was actually put on the FBI's top 10 most wanted list. Again, now we're dealing with international crime here. A tip was put in. They were trying to look, and they didn't know he was in Mexico, obviously, but a tip was put in that eventually led authorities to Mexico, where Longo was staying. He was actually staying, so basically what Longo did was he fled to Mexico. He located this cabana to stay in. He was staying with a German photographer that he had met, and right away when he got down there, basically what he did was just throw himself into the party scene. Just, I don't know if it was to forget his worries, if he felt like he was free, what have you. He just like went to Mexico to party and I guess didn't look back. Now, he basically tried to start a new life, not only like entering this party scene, surrounding himself with a whole new country, all new people, but he also changed his name/identity. He decided that he was now going to be going by the name of Michael Finkel. Michael Finkel was not a made-up name. He was actually a former travel writer that worked for the New York Times. How Christian made the jump from one to the other, not really sure, but that's who he decided he was now, which actually like really impacted the actual Michael Finkel's life. He ended up getting fired from the New York Times, like
holy shit.
Yeah, the whole 9 yards. It like and again, Michael in reality had absolutely nothing to do with Christian Longo, but just really got screwed over by this whole debacle.
How? All right, unless you're going to get to it, but
no, we're not going to go into super hard detail of it, but basically, very long story short is like there was this story that came out that was kind of like this is a little borderline, like a sus story kind of.
Yeah.
Michael Finkel, it was tied back to, he basically got tied to Christian Longo and how he was like involved in this case, but he really wasn't. And then there was this kind of like sus story that comes out and the New York Times let him go. He actually did, I think it was a book, not a movie, but it might have been turned into a movie. Had a book deal after he got fired from the New York Times. He signed a book deal to basically talk about how he was impacted by the Christian Longo case. So poor Michael Finkel, just like, imagine that. Imagine if somebody was like, I am now going to use your identity. You have nothing to do with me. I have never, like, I don't know who you are, but
that'd be shitty.
So awful. Finally, on January 13th of 2002, Christian Longo was detained by Mexican federales and an FBI agent. So they were able to locate him. They took him into custody. Now, they took him back to the U.S. And this, from the time that they located him to the time they got him back to the U.S., was a little bit of this like gray zone, because between Mexican law where they were located and U.S. law, they are not exactly the same. So in his later on in his trial, defense tried to make the argument that the FBI actually didn't have authority to extradite him back to the U.S. but they told him, the FBI agent told him like, hey, if you don't agree to come back with me to the U.S., you're going to spend a couple months in Mexican prison. Basically that like scared Christian into coming back with him. So defense really laid into that of like, you didn't read him his rights. He wasn't able to get a defense lawyer, yada, yada, yada. You kind of coerced him to come back to the U.S. It basically a bunch of BS, but defense laid into that. Mostly because they didn't have much else to lay into, because it was clearly he was guilty. Now, Longo did give authorities details into kind of the disaster of their family, but he did not confess to the murders. Longo shared that he had told people after they were already dead, he was telling people that his wife had left him and took the children and left him for another man. So he was like, oh, poor me, I'm the victim here. During his trial, Longo discovered, and that he was not aware of this beforehand, Longo discovered that Oregon is actually a state that allows the death penalty. So Longo's attorney tried to work out a deal to avoid this, but the state was not willing to budge on this one. They were pushing the death penalty, and there was not, they really weren't willing to negotiate. The defense did try to get a change of venue, to create a fair trial, but that was also denied because this was just such a widely known story that even changing the venue wasn't really going to change the fact that this was all over media and this was like a huge thing. Prosecution argued that Longo was a cold-hearted killer. He made the decision to annihilate his family because, the burden of his family and of the financials and all of that was weighing on him just was too heavy to carry any longer. Prosecutors also argued that Longo had been planning his family's deaths for months. So this was kind of, again, since they were going for the death penalty, they had to prove all these things, right? Like we talk about first degree murder, you have to prove that it was a planned and it was intentional, that kind of thing. I mean, the death penalty is it has to be rock solid, case closed. Now, Longo would not give authorities details into how he specifically murdered each family member, but he did slip up because he made the comment, "I sent them to a better place." It's a comment like that, "I sent them to a better place," is something that defense and prosecution can lay into really hard. I mean, they could create two completely different stories. Defense is like, oh, he was talking about, has to do with his religion, and it was not anything to do with the murders, where prosecution was like, yeah, no, he's literally talking about murder.
See, that's crazy to me that the defense would be able to use that at all. The I is the kicker, right?
Yeah.
I sent them?
Yes.
Or like they're in a better place?
Yeah, that would be a completely different statement.
Yeah, so that's crazy.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Spoiler alert, it didn't work. But the defense just basically they were trying to, seemingly what they were trying to do was like not even prove his innocent, like versus just trying to dodge prosecution's points. Prosecution had a pretty airtight case around this, and there was enough pointing to him. Even like Longo himself basically incriminated himself by doing all these little things, and defense was basically just trying to like smudge up prosecution's points to make like just to instill doubt in the jury. And again, you see this in a lot of cases, like when somebody goes to trial, in order to be exonerated, you don't have to prove somebody's innocence. You have to prove that in order to charge them or convict them, they have to be guilty without reasonable doubt. So really all defense has to do is create reasonable doubt. And especially in this case, defense was like, that is literally the only card we have in our hands because it is extremely clear that Longo is not innocent in this case. Now, this trial was also very interesting. 9 times out of 10, defense does not want to put the person who is on trial on the stand. It just like, yes, they can sit there and explain their story, but it gives the prosecution.
It just doesn't happen.
No, it opens this whole can of worms for prosecution to just have at it. But Longo actually took the stand as his own key witness in this case. He said that...
Advised to do so? Or was that a fucking I'm doing this kind of thing?
Unspecified.
Okay.
He said that he confessed to all the hardships that they were going through to Mary Jane. So he basically like came clean. This was his story. He came clean to Mary Jane about all the
money problems
and his fraud and his lies and his scheming and whatnot. When he confessed this all to Mary Jane, she became extremely upset with him, rightfully so, and she snapped, killed one of the kids. While Longo just happened to be at work, conveniently. Now, first of all, how sick of a human being do you have to be to try and pass off the murders onto your dead wife? That's just like, I mean, we already know he's a monstrous human, but again, that's crossing a very different line. Longo had this story and he said, okay, so Mary Jane killed one of the kids. I came home, found her lifeless body, and I snapped on Mary Jane. So I choked her to death, or what he thought was dead, and then snapped on, Mary Jane had killed 2 of the kids, and then he snapped on Mary Jane, killed the last of the kids, and then disposed of all the bodies. So interesting play in the fact that like he admitted to killing Mary Jane and one of the kids, but not the other 2. And I'm not sure what his, I guess, reasoning behind that was, other than if maybe he thought, oh, only 2 of them, like I can avoid the death penalty. Maybe he started to realize, I'm not getting out of this scotch-free.
Yeah.
Let's make this as good as I can for myself. That was, again, prosecution poked holes in his story. And then they just basically, they picked Longo's lies apart and they're like, yeah, no. April 7th, 2003. So this case went on for a long time. 4 hours of deliberation. The jury came back with a guilty verdict of aggravated murder of 4-year-old Zach and 3-year-old Sadie. Now, the jury had to go back into deliberations and decisions about the death penalty or what his actual sentencing was going to be. So then on April 16th of 2003, the jury deliberated for about 6 hours, and they came back giving Longo, they gave him the go-ahead for the death penalty for the murders of all 4 of his family members. He was then put on death row. Now, as we know, when somebody's put on death row, it's not just like, hey, you're on death row, hey, you're executed, done. Normally, they stay there.
Takes forever.
Takes forever. And I don't know if this is common knowledge or not, but somebody, housing and keeping an inmate on death row costs millions of dollars. It is so expensive. I mean, even just like housing inmates as a whole and the upkeep of prison costs a lot of money, but somebody on death row and they're going to stay there for a really long time.
There's a difference. And
you're also spending all of this money on somebody who's set to be executed. So the lengthy time of it all, just like really, again, you have to make sure though they have their rights to the appeals, the yada, 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 which Longo knew. Almost immediately after he received his conviction, he began his appeals process, which this then, once they, set to appeal, this then was delaying his execution by at least 5 to 10 years. Now, Longo, has tried some of his appeals. Obviously, none of them have worked. He actually tried to start this movement of saying like, hey, you can execute me sooner if you can speed up my execution if you allow me to donate my organs. Donating inmates' organs is a very controversial, like slippery slope in that sense. So this may have been kind of a like reverse psychology play to delay his execution even longer, because then you get into a ton of semantics and time.
Why is it a slippery slope?
There's basically just like a lot of laws and regulations that aren't super favorable about it, but like also it's not really that bad of an idea, right? But
what is it? People probably think like implanting.
Yeah, prisoners' organs.
Yeah, interesting.
A lot of it too could be heavily impacted by like drug use or illnesses, that kind of thing. That's obviously a higher chance of that kind of stuff in prison, or even the reason you went to prison with drugs in the first place. So they don't really want to like donate, organs that have been impacted by those kinds of things. So just a very like gray area. There's not a ton of regulation on that kind of stuff. So whether this was him being like, hey, I'm going to, do a good Samaritan act before I go out because I really messed up, or if it was him like knowing that this was going to delay his execution a lot longer, I don't know. Still on death row. Surprisingly, very little updates on this case since like 2015. That was really the last major updates I could find. Like even if you kind of look like, is Christian Longo even still alive? You see like a couple articles from like one from 2020, maybe one from 2021. But the most like major last really, I guess, media swing on this case was 2015.
And they haven't abolished it?
No.
Wow. I figured they would have abolished it. But I mean, a lot of states have, right? But I don't know if it's like the people who are already in it. I don't know if they had to get, see out that process, but.
Yes. To my knowledge, I did not see anything that said Oregon has abolished the death row, option. But at the same time, I don't know that abolishing it would clear those who already have been sentenced to death row. Like that they might not be grandfathered in to the new law.
Interesting. I'm trying to look it up.
Yeah. So, I mean, he's dodged. Again, he was sentenced in 2003. So it's been almost 20 years that he has, dodged his execution. But again, I just think of like how much money it has costed to keep him on death row for this long is absolutely absurd. Death row is a very, very complicated conviction to deal with on either side. But I mean, at least we can say if anything came out of this case, it was the fact that, the killer was put to justice, whether, we could spend a whole nother thing saying, talking about whether death row is actually justice or not. But he was, he had to answer for his crimes, right?
Yeah.
That's at least we can say. It's more than we can say for some other cases, but just an absolutely brutal.
Disgusting. Yes.
Yeah.
Horrible. This KDRV.com says after Oregon Supreme Court ruled the death penalty unconstitutional in 1981, voters reinstated capital punishment in 1984. Despite the fact that capital punishment remains law in Oregon, the last execution to take place was in 1997. So I would not guess that he will ever be executed.
Wow, 1997.
And that was as of October 7, 2021.
Interesting. So basically they're saying we still have the death row. We reinstated it, but we're not actually acting on it whatsoever, really. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's basically a life sentence. Yeah, 1997. That's it's a very long time. And I obviously Longo cannot be the only one who's on death row. I know that there was like this whole slew of, there was this whole push to get, a slew of inmates off of death row. I don't know that. I think Longo was around like between 35 and 40 years old when he was sentenced. So he's probably going to die in prison before they even get close to executing him. Yeah. He's got obviously no chance of probation or parole or anything like that. He's tried to appeal. It's not really a case that he's even, you can try and get out of it on a technicality, I guess, but there's no room for appeals as far as like, I didn't do this, I'm innocent. Like, no, they're not. It's very clear.
Yeah. It's a brutal case.
It is.
It's a brutal case.
It really is.
But all right, Allie, thank you. That's it for today, everybody. Thank you for listening. That's it for this week. We'll be back on Monday. We will see you then.